All right, let's dive into this explainer and look at how a series of 18th century religious revivals actually accidentally planted the seeds for the American Revolution. We usually picture the founding of the United States all about taxes, throwing tea in the harbor, political philosophy. But the truth is, decades before a single shot was fired, there was this massive cultural earthquake that completely reshaped how everyday colonials viewed authority, their communities, and even themselves. So, how exactly did a handful of colonial preachers spark a movement that eventually gave us the Ivy League, split whole towns in two, and quietly laid the groundwork for American independence? Well, here's our roadmap to finding out. First, we'll meet the leaders of the awakening. Then, we'll spotlight the absolute phenomenon that was George Whitefield. After that, we'll dig into the massive backlash, the theological ripple effects, and finally, how the whole thing snowballed into a true social revolution. Let's jump right into Section 1, Leaders of the Awakening, and how cross-denominational this was. We're going to start by meeting the heavyweights of this cultural movement. Now, what's really wild to see here is that these four men came from completely different church backgrounds, but they were working in parallel to ignite this massive shift in American culture. Think about it. You've got Jonathan Edwards, a brilliant American-born Congregationalist. Then there's Theodore J. Frelinghuysen, who's out there trying to shake up the Dutch Reformed churches. You've got Gilbert Tennent getting the Presbyterians all fired up. And then George Whitefield, an Anglican clergyman who just ignored denominational lines entirely. They weren't some organized committee, right? But their individual efforts all combined into this absolute tidal wave. And, the story of Gilbert Tennant perfectly captures just how grassroots this whole era really was. His dad, William Tennant, felt that Presbyterian ministers just weren't being trained the right way. So what does he do? He just starts teaching his three sons himself, in this tiny little log cabin right next to his house. The elite establishment completely mocked it. They jokingly called it the Log College. But hey, William and his sons absolutely had the last laugh. In 1746, the legacy of that little log cabin officially evolved into the College of New Jersey, and you and I know that today as Princeton University. To really wrap your head around this movement, just look at the stark contrast in preaching styles. On one side, you had the brilliant Jonathan Edwards. When he delivered his famous sermons, he was so incredibly careful. He read straight from a manuscript, argued with the precision of a top-tier lawyer, and get this, he famously just kept his eyes glued to the church bell rope in the back of the room so he wouldn't get distracted. It was hyper-rational. Now juxtapose that against George Whitefield. We're talking about a wild, theatrical force of nature who completely abandoned the indoors to appeal directly to the human heart. Which brings us to Section 2. Enter George Whitefield, also known as the Grand Itinerant. Let's see how this momentum really builds when we focus entirely on him. The most staggering thing about Whitefield's ministry? Just the sheer unbelievable scale of it. By 1740, the guy was routinely preaching to crowds of 8,000 people a day. And remember, we're talking about the mid-1700s here. He was doing this entirely in the open air, just using natural acoustics to reach these massive crowds without a microphone. In fact, Benjamin Franklin actually went to hear Whitefield speak in Philadelphia. Franklin purposefully walked around the outer edges of the crowd just to mathematically verify if it was even possible for one human voice to project that far. And, as it turns out, it absolutely could. But Whitefield's environment? It was pure chaos. He wasn't in some quiet, reverent church sanctuary. Instead, he invented this collapsible wooden field pulpit on rollers. He'd wheel it out and set it up in places like the Boston Common. And he would just preach right from it, totally unfazed by opponents who were literally standing right next to him, banging drums or blowing trumpets right in his face, just trying to drown him out. His whole formula was just a massive departure from tradition. He fundamentally changed the setting of the message. Escaping the indoors made religion a public event. Using the everyday language of common folks instead of lofty academic jargon made it super accessible. And by aiming straight for the emotions rather than just the intellect, he made it deeply personal. This exact stylistic choice, speaking plainly to massive crowds out in the open, it eventually spilled over into the broader culture. It heavily influenced how future American political campaigns would be run for centuries. Now, I literally have to share this detail because it just shows you the level of fame we are talking about. Next to the president, he was pretty much the most well-known person in America. He was so incredibly popular that decades later, after he passed away and was buried under the pulpit in a church in Massachusetts, his superfans would actually sneak down into the crypt. Why? to steal fragments of his bones to take home as trophies. I mean, it got so entirely out of hand that the church eventually had to put his remains into a proper, secure casket just to keep the poor guy intact.
Moving on to Section 3, Backlash and Controversy, and a Divided Movement. Because, as you can probably imagine, not everybody was thrilled with this rowdy populist disruption.
This awakening was incredibly divisive. I mean, entire communities literally fractured over it. The Presbyterians are a prime example here. They didn't completely split into two separate denominations right away, but they did split into two warring factions right inside the same church buildings. You had the New Side Party. They loved the revivals, embraced the emotion. They even let everyday lay people preach. But on the flip side, you had the Old Side Party. These were the traditionalists. They demanded strict control over who got to stand behind a pulpit, and honestly, they viewed this whole emotional awakening as dangerously anti-Christian. To really get why sophisticated leaders, like Boston's highly influential pastor Charles Chauncey, saw this whole movement as a disgraceful circus, you have to look at the extremes. Across the pond in England, John Wesley was leading a similar revival, and things got so intensely emotional that attendees started literally yowling and barking like dogs during his sermons. Wesley hated it, and he shut it down immediately. But you can imagine some elite Bostonian taking an evening stroll, hearing reports of people fainting, shouting, and barking, and just thinking, okay, this is absolute madness. And this elite panic extended straight into higher education, too. The prestigious universities of the day pushed back aggressively. Both Harvard and Yale, which ironically were founded by Puritans and Congregationalists specifically to train ministers, they fought hard against the awakening. The professors and presidents at these elite institutions were terrified of this unstructured populist wave. In their minds, religion was supposed to be orderly and rational, definitely not a chaotic, emotion-driven spectacle out in a public field. So let's pivot to Section 4, Theological Ripple Effects and Structural Changes. We're going to dive into the massive shifts this movement left in its wake, starting right with theology. The awakening fundamentally shifted American religious thought towards something called experiential piety. See, before this, the test of your faith was largely about what you knew. Like, could you recite the doctrines? Did you know the hymns? Did you know your Bible verses? But the First Great Awakening completely changed the scorecard. The ultimate test was no longer head knowledge. It was whether you had a deeply personal inner conversion experience. It spoke to the total person. It demanded an emotional yes right from the heart. And ironically, despite all that intense pushback from Harvard and Yale, this movement directly stimulated a massive boom in higher education. Because these new experiential preachers needed to train the next generation of leaders for their revived congregations, they just went out and built their own schools. The Presbyterians gave us Princeton. The Dutch Reformed gave us Rutgers. The Congregationalists gave us Dartmouth. The Baptists gave us Brown. So the desire to spread this movement literally laid the foundation for the modern American university system. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, a social revolution, rewiring American minds. Let's look at how this builds from just a religious revival into a total societal revolution. Okay, so the absolutely crucial point of this entire explainer is this exact progression. The Great Awakening completely elevated the common person. All of a sudden, the religious experience of a poor, uneducated farmer was seen as totally equal to that of a wealthy, highly educated elite. Everyday laypeople were suddenly speaking up, taking leadership roles in their local churches. And once common people realized they had equal footing before God and the actual capability to lead their own communities, well, they naturally started looking across the ocean and asking, wait, why can't we lead our own government? And this is exactly where the profound psychological shift happens. The awakening taught everyday colonials that their ultimate allegiance, their religious life, was a matter of personal, individual free choice. Think about it. If you were entirely free to say yes or no to the creator of the universe based on your own conscience, well, suddenly the traditional, unquestioned authority of a human British monarch looks pretty frail, doesn't it? The psychological chains were already starting to break. Which leaves us with his final, truly remarkable thought. When George Whitefield and his contemporaries took to the fields, they were just trying to save souls. But the First Great Awakening didn't just change how America worshipped. It fundamentally rewired the American mind for freedom, instilling this radical sense of individualism and equality that would explode into an all-out revolution just a few decades later. It really proves that sometimes the biggest revolutions in human history don't start with an army, they start with a single voice, speaking to the masses out in an open field. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you on the next one.